Okay, welcome to another session of Jews and the News. And I wanted to talk today about the rising tide of anti-Semitism and just talk a little bit about the origins of anti-Semitism and the nature of anti-Semitism today, and what, if anything, we can do about it. So again, the topic today is anti-Semitism. So I wanted to approach it this way, first historically. So we first come across in history anti-Semitism per se. You could argue that it could be from the time of the Greeks and the time of Hanukkah, which then would make this an appropriate time to be talking about anti-Semitism, since Hanukkah begins this coming Sunday night. Because though there are occurrences in history before that of people attacking the nation of Israel, the attacks, like the Babylonians attacking or the Assyrians attacking Israel in the 700s BCE, and the Babylonians attacking Israel and destroying the temple in 586 BCE. You could argue that those are purely military attacks on the nation of Israel itself, not an attack on the people. And it wasn't a racist or anti-Semitic attack. It was merely for territorial purposes. Whereas the Greeks, who were in charge of the land of Israel at the time of Hanukkah, which was 2,100 years ago, you could argue that they initiated policy against the people of Israel from worshiping the Greeks prohibited Israelites from worshiping in an Israelite manner, so that Israelites were prohibited from worshiping in the temple in Jerusalem. They were prohibited from keeping kosher, and in fact, there's one story of Greeks forcing a Jew to eat pig in public, and so that is the first instance in Jewish history of policy from the authority against Jewish practice. I'm not calling it Jewish practice yet, technically, because the term Jewish doesn't apply until 100 or so years after the time of Hanukkah. So it's anti-Israelite policy as a people, as opposed to a nation. Okay, so the first time that we have recorded of anti-Semitic actions is in the time of Greeks at the time of Hanukkah. And the struggle of the Maccabees against the Greeks is not just a political struggle for autonomy in the land of Israel, but it's also for the right to be Jewish, for the right to be Israelite and free from oppressive policies that were against the Israelites. So the time of Hanukkah, like I'm saying, is the first time that we have of anti-Semitism against the people of Israel. So that's 2,100 years ago. The Romans continued in that policy after they destroyed the temple. So there were policies at the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt, which was 1,900 years ago. Just about 1,900 years ago, 135 was the year of the Bar Kokhba revolt, 135 CE. So the Romans also instituted anti-Jewish policy, forbidding public study of Torah. And right, so there are stories in the Talmud, in the Mishnah and in the Talmud, of rabbis teaching Torah quietly, in private, secretly, and some rabbis who decided publicly to do it anyway and take their lives, put their lives at risk. And we have stories about those rabbis being captured by the Romans and being tortured and killed for violating the Roman policy. And those stories are in the Machzor on Yom Kippur. The Yom Kippur Musaf service has a section called the Martyrology. And in there, in the traditional Machzor, so in our Machzor, the Lev Shalem Machzor and the Machzorim that we used before that, have the stories of the rabbis who are captured by the Romans and tortured publicly and then killed by the Romans. So we have the Greeks and the Romans instituting anti-Semitic policies. So we see that anti-Semitism is at least 2,100 years old. So historically speaking, then, in history, Jews have been persecuted and oppressed for over 2,000 years. So Greeks and Romans are just two of the many examples throughout history of us being persecuted and oppressed, right? I don't have to give many more examples throughout European history to understand that. And certainly in light of the Holocaust 80 years ago, we know that from 2,100 years ago until 80 years ago, there were oppressive policies and murder as part of the policy of anti-Semitism. Coupled with that is a religious anti-Semitism as well. So it's not just that we have a history of people hating us. There's also embedded in religious tradition a hatred of the Jews. So I just want to share my screen for a moment with an article from My Jewish Learning, which is a great source for anything about Jewish topics. And here this is an article about who killed Jesus. Okay, so here the New Testament account. I prefer not to call it the New Testament because that implies that our Bible is the Old Testament. So I don't like old, new. It's not just me. We can call it the Jewish Bible and the Christian Bible. So this is the Christian Bible. In the letters of Paul, which are regarded by historians to be the oldest works of the Christian Bible, just written 20 years after Jesus's death, Paul mentions, almost in passing, the Jews who killed the Lord Jesus. So if you want to look that up in Thessalonians 2, there is one source for the Jews killing Jesus, who is the Lord, okay? Matthew, the best known gospel, describes the unfair trial of Jesus, arranged and presided over by the Jewish high priest, who scours the land to find anybody who would testify against Jesus. Eventually, the high priest concludes that Jesus is guilty of blasphemy and asks the Jewish council what the penalty should be. They answered, he deserves death. Then they spat in his face and struck him. Matthew's description of Jesus's suffering and death on the cross has become the basis for many books, plays, and musical compositions over the years, and is prominent in Christian liturgy, particularly for Easter. Okay, so there is a Christian biblical source for Jews killing Jesus. Okay, And so that has been maintained throughout Christianity all the way until the early 1960s, when Pope John the 23rd convened the Second Vatican Council and stated there that the Jews did not kill Jesus. Okay, the problem is, so Jesus, 1st century CE until the 20th century CE, 1900 years ingrained in Christian culture, and we're talking Christians around the world. So those are millions, billions of people who have been taught in Christian religious schools that Jews killed Jesus. Until 1965, they were taught that. And then since then, there's just the Catholics. How much really has it changed? So I don't know. I don't know about the curriculum of Catholic schools in America, whether actually the wording has changed in their textbook. But passion plays that are still performed in Christian churches before Easter, still, though the script for the passion plays has not changed. And so if you're quoting Matthew, the Pope 60 years ago did not say that we should change the words of the Christian Bible. He just said we should change how we understand the Christian Bible. So if the words of the Christian Bible are still there, and those words are still then in passion plays, then Christians are still learning that the Jews killed Jesus. Okay? Now, it could very well be that many Christians understand that the Jews did not do that, or they will make a distinction. The Jews 2,000 years ago killed Jesus, but all of us watching on Zoom today, we did not kill Jesus. Christians might make a distinction between that. However, my point is not to be mad at Christians, but rather to provide a context for where anti-Semitism comes from. So anti-Semitism, there's a historical basis for it, with authorities over the centuries in enacting anti-Semitic policy, right? So whether it's Jews need to live in a ghetto, Jews need to wear particular clothing to distinguish themselves from other people, Jews prohibited from engaging in certain professions, etc., etc. So we have that throughout the centuries, throughout Europe, and coupled with that is the religious sensibility too. And at the time, the history and the policy of the authority and the biblical source for it go hand in hand, because the countries of Europe in the Middle Ages were religious-oriented countries. So the policy is based on religious sensibilities. Okay, so that the Christian religious perspective of anti-Semitism, along with the practical policy of individual nations against the Jews, are one and the same. So anti-Semitism is a biblical, a religious policy. Okay, if a Christian understands the Christian Bible, it literally, that according to Matthew and Thessalonians, then the Jews killed Jesus, and therefore the Jews need to be reviled at the very least, if not have policies against them, if not drive them out of our country. So which England did in the 1200s, which Spain did in 1492, besides enacting the Inquisition, Catholic policy to ordained by the Pope to allow to happen, to force people to convert to Catholicism on pain of death. And that's what the Inquisition was, which spread from the Iberian Peninsula, so it spread from Spain to Portugal, right? So Jews escaped Spain in 1492, the day before Christopher Columbus sailed, right? July 31st, 1492 is when Jews were forced out of Spain on pain of conversion or death. And then August 1st, 1492 is when Christopher Columbus set sail, which provides some theory that perhaps Christopher Columbus was Jewish, or a secret Jew, or he had in his crew secret Jews. You can Google that on your own to see if there's any validity to that theory. But from Spain, they went to Portugal, and then 10 years later, forced out of Portugal, and then spread, escaping to Holland, or to Italy, or to Turkey, to Greece, and to Turkey, and then to the New World. And the Inquisition followed in the New World too, which is why a boatload of Jews left Portugal in Brazil, left Brazil in 1654, and landed in New Amsterdam in America. Okay, so that's why that boatload of Jews became the first Jews to arrive on American soil in 1654, because they were escaping the Inquisition, which had spread to Brazil. Okay, so anti-Semitism is deep-seated historically and religiously, which I'm saying go hand in hand. Okay, so as opposed to other forms of racism, which there's a history of that too, there isn't necessarily a religious component to being anti-Black. There isn't necessarily a religious component to being anti-Asian. But as there is a religious component to be anti-Semitic. So the other thing I want to say about this is the psychological component of hatred to other human beings. And I think, I'm not a psychologist, but from what I have learned over the years, human beings are animals. We are animals at our core, right? We are four-legged creatures that in one sense are no different than apes and chimpanzees. Okay, so we're just another, Homo sapien, as opposed to whatever other Latin name for other mammals. Okay, so at our core, we are animals. And at our core, then, we have certain basic animal instincts that, because we are human beings, we're able to cope with in a way that other animals cannot. Our brains are such that we can understand what our condition is as a human being, as an animal, and we can learn how to cope with that and to better ourselves in some way. Okay, but our basic animal instinct is survival. And survival, in terms of we need to survive, and if that means running away from you or killing you in order for me to survive, then I'm going to do that. So at our core, we are animals, and we are concerned with survival of the fittest, and concerned that we survive, and it doesn't matter if somebody else's life is at risk. As long as we survive, that's what's important. So the hatred of others is if we feel threatened by the presence of another person or another group of people in our midst. If they somehow threaten us, then we have the right to be afraid of them, and we have the right to institute policy to keep them out. And we have a right to teach lessons that would promote, even though they are false, that would promote the message that these people are a threat to us. They need to be hated and need to be shunned. So that it's perhaps a simplistic, but I think a basic understanding of why white people would hate Black people or yellow people or anybody else or why Americans would close the door to immigrants in 1925 because, or Arizona, the governor of Arizona is hastily placing empty shipping containers on the border with Mexico before the incoming Democratic governor of Arizona takes office. All right, so I'm just bringing something that I just saw in the newspaper this morning of what the governor of Arizona is doing today to keep the other out. Okay, you can couch it in terms of keeping illegal immigrants out, but it's also a lot of what is said about those illegal immigrants is racist at its core. These are lowly human beings, despicable vermin trying to infiltrate our borders, and we need to have this durable fence and wall there to keep these vermin out. Okay, so such terminology is used today against these against the people who are trying to get into our country, whether legally or illegally, whether for humanitarian purposes or not, whatever. This is not a discussion about the wave of Central Americans trying to get into America. It's not a discussion about that, but I only bring it up in terms of how, according to some, those Central Americans are described, and they are described in racist terms, stemming from this psychological understanding of the need to hate other people and where it comes from, and how, for political purposes, it serves a purpose to blame somebody else instead of yourself for our problems. It's a lot easier to blame somebody else than to understand, oh, maybe we actually are doing something wrong. No, for those who are racist, white supremacists, for example, there's no way that white people could be doing anything wrong. The problem in America today is anybody who is not white and Protestant imposing their values on us and dirtying white American Protestant values, which are what the founding fathers were promoting 250 years ago. Okay, so we have then a psychological basis for racism and hatred in general, coupled with a history of Jews being treated differently for the past 2,100 years, coupled with a biblical basis for that as well. And so, which makes then anti-Semitism the most difficult and deep-seated hatred to try to overcome. So, whereas with other forms of hatred, anti-Black hatred, for example, I'm not saying it's easy to overcome that. We all know how difficult and tragic the life of Black people in America has been since the 1600s here. So, right, the 1619 Project, whatever we think of that, 1619 is the first time recorded that a Black person was sold into slavery here in America. So we know of the history of anti-Black hatred in this country, and though we could argue that Black people have seen much progress, there is still rampant anti-Black sentiment in our country. We know that for sure. And so, and it only highlights how the psychological challenge to overcome this sense of hatred. And no matter how much we try to claim that we ourselves personally might be above this, and we have good feelings towards everybody in the world and everybody around us, and we want to promote justice and equality for all, in our core, and I can speak personally, there is still at times you feel a little bit perhaps scared about driving through certain neighborhoods of certain cities. Is that right to feel scared, depending on the time of day, depending on the gender of the person who is scared, and the neighborhood? Just as one example, is it would we buy a house in a particular neighborhood? Would we allow, for example, group homes for people who are physically or intellectually disabled to be established in a particular neighborhood? So these are things that Jewish people have been involved in a negative way, and we have to confront our racism, our bigotry ourselves. So I just wanted to put this all in this presentation, just put this in this psychological, historical, and religious context, and to understand that when Kanye West, when the other guy, Alex Fuentes, are invited to the past president's house for dinner, it's a major problem. And when a basketball player promotes a movie that is definitely anti-Semitic, it is a problem. And so, though they have been called out, the fact that prominent people are still displaying hatred and bigotry is a major problem. Certain political leaders have made strides over the years at the risk of death. JFK, RFK, willing to work with the Black community. The Martin Luther King himself, et cetera, et cetera. So it takes a unique individual with charisma and strength to stand up against bigotry. And the more difficult financial condition the society is in, the more difficult it is to overcome these feelings of bigotry and hatred, because it's so much easier when times are tough to blame somebody else for the problems. So I have no solution to this. I'm just raising our understanding of this and putting it in context, and saying that in this country today, the acts of anti-Semitism, be they physical acts or otherwise, have risen exponentially in the past couple of years. The ADL has documented this, not just in America, but all around the world. Anti-Semitism has risen drastically and dramatically, along with other forms of racism and bigotry as well. And so it's a scourge and a plague in our society and in global society. And we haven't found a way yet to satisfactorily overcome these deep-seated hatreds. And we could as I conclude this, I just want to bring us back to a Jewish perspective too on this. Jews are not free from hatred of the other. I mean, we have sources for this in the Torah as well. And they're based on the idea that idolatry is bad. So therefore, people who worship idols are bad. And the Torah, especially the book of Deuteronomy, teaches us that when the people of Israel enter the land of Israel, they're supposed to annihilate the indigenous idolatrous population. And so there's hatred already built in of people who are idolatrous, and no two ways around it. God says we need to cleanse the land of idol worshipers. A person who's an idol worshiper is bad. So that's another form of the other. So it's deep-seated in our biblical tradition too, to hate the other. And we could say there are no idolaters anymore, so therefore we shouldn't have to hate anybody anymore. But we know that there are Jewish people who hate other people. You just look, it's horrifying to hear about cases in Israel today, first of bigotry towards Ethiopian Jews. So white Jews in Israel display a sense of looking down upon the Black Ethiopian Jews who have made Aliyah. You have this white Ashkenazic Jews who have looked down on not so white Sephardic Jews or Jews from Arab countries. There is always that sense. So for the longest time, from 1948, even before, with the World Zionist Congress before that, or the Jewish Agency in Israel, from 1948 until the late 1970s, the government of Israel was always white Ashkenazic. The first time a Jew from an Arab country was in the government of Israel as a minister was when Menachem Begin became prime minister and appointed David Levy, a Sephardic Arab country origin Jew, to be in his coalition. So it took 30 years. So you could argue that's a token Sephardic Jew in the government of Israel. So there are songs and poems from early Israel and from the early Jewish settlers, pioneers in Israel about Sephardic Arab country Jews, calling them Kushim, which is the derogatory term for dark-skinned person. So it's sad to know that in Israel's history, in just 75 years, there are attitudes against of Jew against Jew, white Ashkenazim against Sephardim, and Ashkenazim against Ethiopian Jews, and and of course Jew against Arab. Okay, so everybody likes to promote how much of a melting pot Hadassah Hospital is in Jerusalem, and you have Jewish doctors and Arab, Israeli Jewish doctors and Israeli Arab doctors, Israeli Jewish nurses and Israeli Arab nurses working side by side in the hospital. And Israel likes to promote that sense of diversity there in the hospital. But such examples, unfortunately, are few and far between in Israel today. Okay, so my point is not to disparage, denigrate, criticize Israel. My point simply is that bigotry is inherent to the human condition. It is tragic that it is so. It is coupled with the fact that there's a religious basis for it as well, makes it that much more challenging and difficult to overcome. Because we can't change the words of the Bible. We can educate ourselves to psychologically change our demeanor towards other people. It is very hard behaviorally to change one's attitude. It is possible psychologically to do that, but it takes a tremendous amount of work to do it. Sometimes it involves hypnosis and other drastic means like that. An incredible amount of psychological amount of time to change our psychology in order, and our personality, in order to be one in which we don't have a sense of bigotry to other people. All right, so though we can complain about and shake our hands about the rise of anti-Semitism, there's not much we can do except to advocate for people to just to teach the other side, and to always articulate and verbalize protest against acts of anti-Semitism. So it's important that when Kanye West says his piece, that that at the same time or immediately thereafter, there's somebody else protesting that and saying that's not us. There has to be a voice against bigotry and against anti-Semitism, and we have to be sure to advocate for those voices. It's one thing for a Jew to be advocating against anti-Semitism. It's much better if a non-Jew would be voicing protest for anti-Semitism, and we have to be advocates for that. We need to support ADL. We need to support other organizations that promote education and promote an understanding and a way to change people's attitudes about the other, so that we can so that when we think of the Bible, the first thing we should think about is Ve'ahavta l'reyecha kamocha. Love your fellow human being as you love yourself. That is what we need to understand, and that's what we need to promote. Any thoughts, questions, or comments about this? So
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Howard.
It's kind of unrelated, but I'll still ask it. Where did the idea that we are the chosen people come from?
So that comes from the Torah and the book of Exodus. We're told Am Segula. We are a treasured people. We were chosen by God. Well, Abraham and Sarah were chosen by God to establish a covenant with God, that the descendants of Abraham and Sarah, you and me, would inherit the land of Israel, and we would become a holy people to live in the Holy Land. So we're chosen for this covenant to live in the land that God chose. So that there is that sense that we are the chosen people in that way. Unfortunately, that's been understood over the centuries that being chosen means that we are better.
Yeah.
Okay, and so that I don't like to teach it that way. Yes, I could, and we say this when we come up to the Torah, when we have an aliyah, we're called to the Torah to have an aliyah. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, who chose us, that God chose us from among all the peoples. Okay, so that's so the thought that we are a chosen people is written down into the liturgy. Okay, so but it doesn't say that we're chosen to be better. We're chosen to, there's a responsibility with being chosen to be a light unto the nations, in Hebrew, or la goyim, a light unto the other nations. And we shouldn't understand goyim there in the Yiddish insulting, offensive term as goyim, okay? We should not understand it that way. It just means other nations. So we're supposed to be an example in our behavior of what an enlightened spiritual people is supposed to act like. So if we act with justice and love and equality, then that's what being a light unto the nations means. Okay, so chosen has a burden and a responsibility of being a good person. Unfortunately, over the centuries, chosen has implied for a lot of people to mean better and to have an attitude that we're better than other people. Okay, so that attitude does come out sometimes in some segments of the Jewish community in how we act towards other people. You have that in the ultra-Orthodox community, for example, in how the ultra-Orthodox like to stay isolated in their own community because they don't want to be influenced in any way by anybody else. And that influence, because we are chosen, the ultra-Orthodox say, we have a responsibility to act in a particular way, and part of that action is not to be tainted by anything else. And that being tainted also means by any other segment of the ultra-Orthodox community. So Satmar and Lubavitch can't stand each other, and also ultra-Orthodox can't stand anybody else who's not ultra-Orthodox at all. So it's Jew against Jew, Jew against other people as well. So, and again, it's not to disparage the ultra-Orthodox, it's just to give an example of how deep-seated these ideas go. Lori.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention on the positive side, according to the ADL, a survey they did, that the anti-Jewish attitudes in the US are relatively low. And if, in contrast, of course, we have the organized, the social media that are, and the visibility and the very real hate crimes that are increasing. So those two things are side by side. So,
Well, so it also depends who they survey, but I guess yes, I think in general one can say that American society, by its nature, is more open and accepting of people who are different than other societies around the world. So I think that is safe to say. I mean, just look at our ancestors who fled persecution in Europe and found a safe haven here in America. Okay, so there is always this, there is a sense of how America is open to anyone who seeks freedom, no matter who they are, what color their skin is, and where they come from. So that is the general attitude, whereas in Europe, for example, that's not the case. And it's just how America started. America was started by immigrants, and therefore that was codified in the Declaration of Independence and Constitution and in our laws, whereas Europe all the countries in Europe were not started in that way. Most of the countries in Europe have religious origins, right? So most of the countries in Europe are, like the King of England now has authority over the Church of England. Okay, so that's just one example. And so okay, so yes, so our responsibility as educated people and as Jewish people is to ensure that America maintains its values towards other people, and that the rising tide of social media and conspiracy theories and hatred that is spewed on social media every single day. Thankfully, I don't read it. I don't engage in it. I don't subscribe to Twitter or any of these other social media outlets. So I don't do it. But it's our responsibility to be on there to combat it. That's what we need to do. Any other? Yes, go ahead, Lori.
Yeah, just one more point I was
Yeah.
thinking about. So on the one hand, because these are two separate but interrelated. For example, I have an African-American friend who told me her mother taught her that Jews understand suffering and a Jewish friend is a friend for life. So that was just a very positive,
Right.
alliance. On the other hand, I think there's some confusion because of how our oppression looks different from other people's. I think to a lot of people, we look privileged, like
Yeah,
how could
that is
we
no,
be-
that absolutely, that is a problem, and it's certainly an issue when it comes to Black-Jewish relations in America. I think most Black people see Jewish people as white people, and therefore as privileged, and don't understand then our history of anti-Semitism, and that here in America, okay, had it not been for Tree of Life 3 years ago, that attacks on Jews in America have been few and far between. There was a Jew lynched in Georgia in the early 1900s, and certainly Jews have been insulted. I mean, either we ourselves or our parents or grandparents tell stories about how we were treated in public school, right? And insulted because we're Jewish, but attacks against Jewish institutions have been few and far between in America in relation to how rampant it was throughout Europe over the centuries. So yes, America is safe and for Jews, and Jews have been relatively free from attack, and therefore among generalizing among the Black community, it's an education for them to understand, oh, well, Jews have suffered too throughout the ages. Yeah, so it is hard. It is hard to you're on the social action committee of the shul, so you remember in the past couple of years how we tried to engage a relationship with two different Black churches in the area.
Okay, I wasn't a member then, but
Okay, but
heard a little bit.
so we tried, and they met with moderate success, and it takes a lot of energy, time and energy to try to keep it going, that we just did not have, and they did not have either. So it's hard. It's hard to break down these barriers, but we need to keep trying. Yeah, Jules.
I was going to say that being in a later generation, you should forgive me. I remember my grandparents using the word goyim. The Shabbos goy was going to come in
Right,
and turn the lights out.
right.
And the old saying, "Oy, shikar is a guy, shikar is a trinkum is a father is a guy."
Yeah,
This is a embodiment
yes,
of anti
yeah, bigotry.
sentiment
Yes, absolutely.
in among Jews. So
Yes,
in my mind now, I'm 94 now.
Yeah.
I can't get that out of my mind.
no, I hear
Not-
you. That's a perfect example, Jules, of how we're raised, the kinds of sayings that we're raised with. So that's why I said I pronounced the word intentionally goyim, because that in the Torah, the way the trup and the vowels are put there on the word, that's the way you're supposed to pronounce it. But in the Ashkenazi Yiddish way, it's goyim. And if you hear goyim, then you hear then how you were raised, raised with this attitude towards non-Jews. They're goyim, which are bad. It's insulting, and and for black people too. So the Yiddish word for black is schwarz, right? And so schwarz is black, schwarzes. So but it was not, so blacks in America. There's nothing pejorative about in referring to them as blacks, right? So, but there is if you refer to them as schwarzes in Yiddish, because that has a pejorative and an offensive insinuation to it. So that's just how it's understood. So yeah, it's hard to overcome what we've learned since childhood, and you can do it. It's just harder, and it's also harder if we lead an insular life, right? So my life as a rabbi has me not have too many encounters with non-Jewish people. I mean, obviously I have to buy food in a grocery store, etc. So, but other than that, going to work, so I don't work with the office manager is a non-Jewish person, but she's white. And the executive director is a Jewish white woman also. And so my encounters with other rabbis also are other white people. So I went to Jewish day school all my life, K through 12, and then I did go to college, but I also at night went to a Jewish college. And then my professional school for my degree was a rabbinical school. So my encounters with others have been minimal. So yeah, so I can talk the talk, but walking the walk is another matter.
Rabbi, just in that same vein.
Yeah.
There's something involved in what you just said, which needs to be stressed.
Yeah.
Jews believed in education,
Right.
in learning, and a lot of that learning has put them in places of authority, has given them elections to office,
Right.
has raised money in business because they're astute businessmen, not the only astute businessmen, but
Right.
they're there in larger numbers than their percentage of the population would indicate.
So I don't know the
Therefore-
statistics, Jules. I just want to interrupt you for just that. I don't know the actual statistics there. Are we disproportionately represented in government based on our size in the general population? I don't know. I have to look at the statistics.
I heard that though, Rabbi.
Okay.
I
Okay,
heard
could
that
be.
being said.
Yes.
I would be willing to be challenged about it, but
Yeah.
it's still something to realize
Yes.
that part of it is true.
Yes.
It's true that the Jews, unlike many other people, insist upon education.
Right.
How many times do you hear Jewish mothers and fathers spend thousands of dollars to see that their children get a
Yeah. So,
proper
right. So we
education?
have certain values have been promoted so that, yes, so we've been involved in government and in American pursuits that are at its nature not meant to be discriminatory. We're supposed to be open and open to all these things. And just so there are 100 senators, right? Two senators for every state. So if they're supposed to represent the population of the general population, then Americans, Jews in America are what, 0.3% of the population? There are 6 million Jews in America out of 350 million people in America. So there should be what, one Jew in the Senate, and if there's a minion of senators, then yes, so we're disproportionately represented in the United States Senate based on our segment of the population. But yes, so we are involved in American pursuits, and but that's not to say that still bigotry still exists in society. Yeah, and just to conclude with this thought, because time is nearly up, that just to say again how difficult it is to overcome, and that if we are traditional religious Jews, then our prayers that we recite every day would help in changing our behavior. And it depends on what the prayers are. If there are some prayers that still ask for God's vengeance on idolaters and those who hate us. Every day in the Amida, we say there is one prayer for Lamal Shinim Al Tihi Tikva, those who wish us ill, there shouldn't be any hope. But at the same time, we also ask for peace around the world. So it's what we focus on in our prayers. It's how we educate our children and the values that we promote. Those are the things that need to always be on compassion, education, equality, and justice.
I have a question.
Yeah, well,
I don't-
Howard, quickly.
Last question. The thing, anti-Semitism, racism, it's been around a long time, but what seems to have changed is Trumpism. We've got this now, 30%.
All right, so I don't want to go there, Howard. I really
Okay.
don't want to go there. I mentioned the past president, and that's as much as I wanted to
Okay.
go in terms
Okay.
of his inviting Kanye West and this Fuentes guy. So
Okay.
I don't want to. So I'll just stop you right there and just
All
say that that however we call it, I'm just calling it what the conspiracy theories on social media and the falsehoods on social media, that it's rampant there, and that makes our job harder because the social media is not censored in any way. Anybody can say whatever they want and come across as being truthful when they're not, and there's no fact checking there. That makes the job of fighting anti-Semitism and fighting any forms of bigotry that much harder. Okay. All right. Have a good day, everybody. And we're on next Monday. I don't have the topic yet for next Monday, but then the Monday after, we will not have class. The Monday, the day after Christmas, and also the day after New Year's, we will not have class. So Jews in the News next week, and then we're off for 2 weeks. Have a good day, everybody.
All right, thanks.